Hello, everybody. It's Heather.
And it's Deb. Hello. We are here with this is our ninth episode of Reluctantly Woo Woo. So we're going to dive into our part two of signs that you need emotional healing. But first, we'll give you our little rundown of why we are here, why we reluctantly woo woo. And we are defining woo woo as those things that are a little bit unbelievable. They defy the logical mind, but they do work. So that's the reluctant part, is we know there's more people like us that are reluctant to believe in some of these practices, but they really are some powerful tools that can be used to heal. So last week we talked about some of the physical signs that you might need emotional healing, right? And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper this time with some additional signs that you might need emotional healing. So I'm going to let you take over.
And we want to talk about first what is emotional healing, and is if we don't know what that is, and it's like, well, why do I need this? And emotional healing is really integrating the parts of ourselves and resolving past trauma so that there's no emotional charge when you talk about something. When you think of a memory and you can talk about it, and it is as if, you talking about your tying your shoes that morning, right? That there's just, oh, this is something that happened, right? It doesn't impact your thoughts or your feelings and your emotions. And when you think about it, you're in control of your emotions and your feelings. And I know it's something that I said many times, that feelings, these words oftentimes are used interchangeably, but the way that I look at them is that feelings are the things that happen automatically, that like you don't really like plan. Like you see a bear running in the woods, and all of a sudden you're like, you seize up and you're like contracted, right? Like that's a feeling. Like it just happens automatically. And emotions then are what you believe or feel about those feelings. So emotion would be like, oh, I'm such a wuss for feeling that way, right? Those are really the things that cause us the problems. The feelings, just are. But our emotions are really the things that keep us, in these loops. And so, I said in the description of this that I had a friend talking to me last week who was just like, well, I'm just grumpy. That's just who I am. And I laughed because I was like, I totally get that. I used to be that. I used to say that all the time. Like, it's just, I just lean towards the negative. I'm just a negative person. Right. And the truth is, that's not at all who any of us are, by nature. You look at a baby who comes into the world, they're not like, they don't have this scowl on their face. Like, how dare you bring me into this world? Right. They're just, they're screaming when they first come in, right? But our natural state is one of love and joy. And when we constantly feel that depression, or what some people would call anxiety, right? Those are things that are signs that we need emotional healing, right? And I'm going to just place that up. But when you don't believe it's possible to be happy or joyful, that's when emotional healing, is probably something you might want to look into.
Yeah.
Right? And the follow-up of that, and it's when somebody uses the same statement again, when they use the like, oh, it's just who I am. But when they are, when somebody who is holding on to challenging emotions, and they are constantly like, well, like, this is just who I am. Like they talk about being struggling all the time, about being a victim.
Right.
Right? Like they're so like, what's the word I'm looking for? They're so connected, right, to struggling and being miserable, right? And right, and that they like that is a sign that you need emotional healing.
Yeah. There's comfort, familiarity, right? But it's kind of a cop out to say. I feel like, anyway, not to judge anybody, but that's just who I am. If it's something that's not helping you move forward in life, and you're just going to tell yourself, it's just how I am story, maybe you could rewrite a new story.
Right. And a lot of people just resign and think, well, like, that's just how it's supposed to be. Right. Which I totally get that. I was always, when I was so miserable in college, and I had the greatest time in my life, but I was also, just like so quick to anger all the time. And my boyfriend would be like, well, that like, you choose that. And I'm like, F you, like, I'm not choosing this. Right. But reality was, I was. right? And now I can see that, but Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about when when emotions, like when they have them, you can have it for days and weeks and months, and it becomes a personal reality, okay? And people are like, that's just my personality. He's like, there's your personal reality, right? That's when it's time to say, wait a minute, if my personal reality is one that's consistently challenging, one that's constantly struggling, right? That's a sign that you need emotional healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's malleable, right? Like you can change that. But I think until people recognize it, right? So this is why it's good to explore the signs, because you won't see it till you're ready to see it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And sometimes you just need to hear like somebody say, hey, that's not normal. Like it's not normal to struggle like that all the time. It's just like, I'm big on health, and it's normal for people to be 40 plus pounds overweight. People are like, that's just how I am. It may be normal, right? It is normal for Americans to be overweight. It's not natural. It's not how we're meant to be.
Right. And that, I think, we talked about it in a past episode, but your family stories can get really intertwined in that, because you can believe that if your whole family was overweight, or your whole family was grumpy, or your whole family was struggling, it's very easy to just fall into the trap of, well, that's how we are, so that's how I am.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I don't know how it is where you grew up, but I grew up in the Northeast, and there's a lot more, like I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina now, which is, it's more of a melting pot. Like you got a lot of people from the Northeast, a lot of people from Midwestern states, right? But the Northeast is very, like, you have your Italian population, you have your Irish population, you have more very specific, nationalities, and it's very like, this is who I am. This is how my people are. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting that you say it that way too, because I grew up in Maine, but it is one of those places where a lot of people don't leave either, so there is that kind of, it's an interesting mentality that can kind of be perpetrated, a bit heavier depending on where you are, I think, and how you identify with those ties.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So another sign that you may need emotional healing is when you're unable to observe your emotions and understand that they do not define you. And so what this means is, when it's pretty much saying the same thing that we've already been saying, is that when you're like, this is just who I am, right? This is me, right? And claiming these emotions as a definition of who you are, instead of just saying, this is a feeling, an emotion that's just passing by, right? Yeah. I am not the one who is that emotion. I'm the one observing it, right? Because when we say like, oh, I'm happy or I'm sad, who's the one observing, right? That's what you're feeling, right? Because we have our observer self, and then we have the self that's experiencing it. And most people are so connected to being the one experiencing it. And when we are unable to distinguish those two, right, that's when we need emotional healing.
That's a good book. I feel like one of the first times I was introduced to that concept was The Untethered Soul.
Oh gosh, it's such a good book.
Yeah, such a good book. I read that a long time ago. I bought that book. It's funny because I actually just sent my copy to a friend as a gift, but I bought that book so many times because I'm constantly giving it away. Such a good one. But to get deeper into that concept of becoming the observer, excellent book that I would recommend people check out.
Yeah, for sure. I was having a conversation with somebody this weekend. We were talking about how they were talking about meditation, and he's like, when I meditate, there's just so many things in my mind. And it was like, well, meditation isn't about your mind being blank all the time, right? It's just about imagining that it's like seeing a movie screen, and you're just seeing the thoughts go by. And you're the person sitting up, in the stairs, just watching it go by. And just like, oh, there goes that. Oh, there goes that.
Not gripping onto them. Yeah.
Right. But when we're the lead actor in the movie, we're like, this is who I am. But when we can take a step back and just observe it, okay, that's when we have experienced emotional healing. Then when we can get to the place where we're the director of the movie or the writer of it, right? That's even greater step to be able to experience, emotional healing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. So another sign of when you need emotional healing is when you have a fear of losing control and letting go. When we need to prove ourselves all the time, and when we need to have the world be the way that we want it to be, that is that is a sure sign that we need emotional healing.
Yeah. I think and related to that would be we talk so much about victim mentality, but when you feel the need to control other people all the time, it's in the vein. But yeah, you can't control other people. They're going to do what they want to do. So when you feel like you need to control others to control your own state, definitely a little red flag.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a hard one, right? Because it's like, oh, well, if I just make these circumstances be how I want them to be, then I'll be happy. No. When we're happy, right, then these other things can change, right? Mm-hmm. And that one is the hardest one for so many people, even within this healing world. Right? I know I get caught up in it sometimes. I'm like, well, if they just did this like this, or if they just did this like this, and it's like, no, this is how it is, right? Can I be happy and peaceful even in spite of all of this? Yeah. Right? Can I be happy and peaceful in a state of this turmoil that we have in 2020, right? That's going on, or with all the things that are happening. Can I be happy and peaceful? And that doesn't mean sitting on your butt and not doing anything, right? But it means not suffering internally. Mm-hmm. Right? How's it? This is a very, very hard one. And we could go in depth about different things to do for that. But a lot of people don't want to go there.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so piggybacking on that thought is when you overthink everything. If you are in your head all the time and afraid of your feelings and don't want to trust your feelings, right, that is a sure sign that you need emotional healing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Anything. Yeah. And then another sign is if you are somebody that focuses on the negative consistently and always waiting for the other shoe to drop and always thinking, well, this is going to happen to me, or this is going to happen to me. I can't be happy because, this. Again, our natural state is not one of negativity. Our natural state is love and joy.
Right.
And here's the reluctant part, right? I say that and I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds totally woo-woo and ridiculous. Right? Yeah. But any religion that you look at, whether it's Christianity, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, any religion, right? It's all about being connected, right, to source, mm-hmm. whatever source they say that is. Yeah. And I don't know of any. I don't know if you did it, Deb, but I don't know of any that source is negative and grumpy and miserable.
Very true. That's very true. Mm-hmm. And I will add to that if that is your state, you will continue to see more of that too. So it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So right. Because I can hear people be like, well, I'm not just focusing on the negative. That stuff really does happen to me, but it will continue to happen to you if that's the state that you are asking to keep receiving.
Right.
What you're doing if you're staying there.
Yeah. And there's nuances with this too, right? And this is with every single thing, there's always nuances. And I have a client who just recently had two massive losses, right? Deaths. She lost her father and her husband, in the past couple of months. Right? And she's struggling with but I'm not feeling love and light. I'm like, no, it's okay. Right? Yeah. She's not focusing on the negative, she's grieving. And a lot of times within this world, it's oh, but just always, you just focus on the positive. Okay, there are times when you have to feel those feelings. I'm big about this. It's you want to feel those feelings, but feeling those feelings and allowing them to move through you is very different than consistently focusing and looking for the negative things that happen.
Yeah. And I think the difference we're talking about is focusing on the negative things that happen, like you just said, versus labeling an emotion negative. It may not be pleasant to feel sad, to feel grief, to feel, any of those negative emotions, but we do need to feel them, right? And I think that's probably one of the first things that you and I worked on together was allowing those emotions to be there and not thinking that there's something wrong with you for feeling them, particularly in a situation where you've lost two significant loved ones. If you're not feeling some sense of sadness or something, I mean, that would be maybe a cause for concern.
That's right. It's like, oh, I just lost these major people in my life, but everything's grand. Right. And you'll go through periods of that, right? Like, because grief just has waves for sure. Yeah. But it's the like, oh my gosh, I lost these people, and now I'm going to lose this, and now I'm going to lose this. Like, that's a very big difference between like, I just feel so heavy and my heart hurts so much, right? You can feel those things and still be, spiritual. You can feel those things and still be positive.
Yes.
Right. It's because otherwise it's, what I always say, it's putting perfume on poop. Mm-hmm. And you keep putting perfume on poop, shit's always going to stink. You just have to keep spraying it. Like, let's just get out of it. And part of the way of getting out of it is feeling the emotions and letting it pass through you instead of just being like, but I should be happy.
Right.
No, like it doesn't work like that.
I think a little self-check on if you are focusing on the negative in the way that we are saying is kind of, again, go back to that role of observer. But when somebody asks you, how was your day? How was your weekend? How are you? Notice what you relay. Because I don't know, I'm sure we all can think of a person or two who, when you ask, how are you? You're like, oh God, please don't be honest. Because they're going to tell you everything that went wrong over the past few days instead of, telling you about a few things that went right.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah. So another sign that you may need emotional healing is when you are reacting instead of responding. And so what this means is reaction is just automatic. You just do it. Responding is like you thought about it, processed, and then you do whatever needs to be done. Right. And so somebody may, cut you off. Right. And reaction is mother effer, blah, 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 giving them the finger. Right. And responding is like taking a deep breath in, and I'm just going to send them some love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's funny. I on my little road trip this weekend stopped at a Starbucks along the way where we were the only two people looking for service at this particular Starbucks at the time. And the girl just seemed completely pissed off that we were there. And at first I was like, God, really sorry to make you do your job was my thought. Right. But then it took her forever to like get our coffee and stuff. So I'm like, I'm just going to send her love. She obviously needs it. Just kind of had to be like, rather than let it get me pissed off. Cause I was like, why are you so rude? I'll let that affect my day. But
right. Yeah. And responding, it really comes down to like having intention about how you're showing up in the world. Mm-hmm. Right. And most people react because they don't feel safe. Okay? And they're in this constant need of defense. Okay? And that just lets us know, like, if we're not feeling safe, that's a huge sign for needing emotional healing. Right? Which I don't know why we didn't put that like on, on the list, but and everything, like if you don't feel safe in the world, I'm just typing this up. If you don't feel safe in the world, that's a sign that you need emotional healing.
Yeah. That is a tricky one because I think that even, that can come up for everybody, particularly in this world that we're in right now. Right.
Yes.
But it's also how you, again, react to that feeling, right? Is it logical for you to not feel safe? Or there's definitely nuance to that one too, I think.
For sure. Right. And that kind of goes back to some of the other ones, but when we're constantly like, you're walking down the street and you're constantly like on edge all the time, there's a very big difference between being wise about being aware of your surroundings. Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah. But if you're constantly feeling like the world is out to get you,
that's a good way to put it.
That is definitely a sign of needing some emotional healing.
Yeah.
And many people can be like, but let me show you all the ways that the world has been out to get me. Right. And that's when all of the things that we talked about, like you have these events that still have a hold on you, and you're constantly looking for ways. You're focusing on, okay, here's all these ways. Right?
You're going to consistently see more ways.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So the last one we're going to talk about is just when you have trouble trusting your own intuition, right? That is really a byproduct of not feeling safe. Right? You've had so much of your power and agency taken away through trauma, through events that were not pleasant, that you're constantly like, well, I just need to go to this event, or I need to go to this conference, I need to go to this healer. I always need to check in with everybody else. And you get in this loop, right, of constantly doing, like, going to the outside of you instead of checking into what's going on inside. Then that's a good sign that you need emotional healing. Because we're created in such a way that our body has its answers on how to heal itself. Right? Our minds, like we have the answers there. And I'm not saying don't go to, I mean, obviously you're listening to this. So like, we want to get stuff. And I go to conferences and retreats all the time. Right? There's a difference between going because I need them versus like, I want to learn and grow. Like I can't heal unless I go to this thing. Right? Versus I'm going to go because I want to experience, some more, like to learn more and to grow more, but I'm never going to be able to change if I don't go to this thing.
Yeah. Again, I think that goes back to the personal responsibility. Going to a conference because you think this is the conference that's going to change my life, or that's going to provide me with something, is really looking for that external resource versus I'm going to go to this to see what insights I can gain to help myself, creating additional internal resources. So I think that's your motivation for why you're reading a certain book or listening to us or because I'm a huge junkie for podcasts and books, and I am always reading. Just it's constant. And so, I mean, my practice is to read it, and then I just kind of sit with these things for a while and be like, okay, what's the practical thing I can take away from that? And sometimes nothing, Yeah. But it's a tool. It's not the one answer, I guess. It's not the solution outside of me.
Yeah. And that's like one of the things that, I know, that I love is, going to plant medicine. Right? And there's so many different plant medicines that are great in healing. And there are some people who are like, I just need to keep going to this over and over and over. And I've done plant medicine a lot, right? And right, when we go to it expecting this thing to heal us versus show me what I need to see, right? And then the integration, like the time that like the ceremony part is not the biggest thing, right? It's the integration and what do you do with the insights that you had. And if you're going to somebody like any kind of person that's a healer, whether they're a shaman or energy healer or something, if they're not helping you to connect back to yourself, right? Instead, they're like, oh, well, you got to come back to me for this, or you got to come back to me for that. That's dangerous. Right? And again, we all need people outside of us because they said, what's the saying? Like a jar can't see its own label, but like you can't.
I heard that.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, we do need people outside of us to like, hey, this is some things I'm seeing. Right. But if it's somebody who's like, you hear these words like guru and like this person's just following this one person all over the world. It's like that healing hasn't begun because they're still just trusting something outside of them, and they don't trust themselves if they're not under that guru's like, apprenticeship or tutelage or whatever. Like, the person, is whatever work they're doing would hopefully be work that would help you to connect back to yourself.
Right.
And what I love about the body code is that it does help you. It helps to release those trapped emotions and trauma so that you can connect back to yourself. It doesn't mean that you might need to work with somebody for a good amount of time. I work with people minimum 6 months when I work with them because there's a lot of crap that most people come to the table with. And there is stuff that needs to be healed. But like, when I was in the coaching world, when I would coach for Tony Robbins, it was like, if you're not constantly re-enrolling the client, then you're not a good coach, and they should coach with you for the rest of, your career here. And I'm like, I hate that.
That is a little bit, the messaging there is, so are we keeping them stuck or are we helping them move on? I don't know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean, like, I have some clients I've been working with for years, right? But it's like they use me as a sounding board, right? Because they have very intense lives and they just need somebody to listen to them and stuff.
Yeah.
But they're not like dependent on me. Sometimes I'm like, hey, where'd you go? I haven't heard from you in a while. You know, like they're not dependent on that. Like, there's a very big difference. And I think it's like, oh, I constantly need coaching. And I'm like, hey, work with me for a while. And if you want to continue working with me, great. If you don't and you want to find somebody else to get something else from, great. You know, because it's like, I feel like if you have the same piano teacher your whole entire life, you're only going to be able to like learn so much. Right.
That's
Like,
an interesting analogy. Yeah, you could only be as good as that particular teacher, I guess, or.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, when you don't trust yourself, and you don't trust that you have the answers, might be signs that you need some emotional healing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that one takes, I think, some deep work and deep practice to get there with that. So, I don't know that. I mean, for me, I didn't really learn to trust my intuition until the last few years, like really trust it. So I don't want anybody to feel like we're calling you out on, something that is not a struggle for many, many, many people, right? Like a lot of people, and part of the not trusting your intuition has so much to do with the programming you were given when you're younger, because we all are born with that. But as children, we get told all the time that our thoughts or what we're seeing or those things are not correct, because they're really, they're a reflection of what your parents' beliefs or, your caregivers, your church, wherever those influences came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it does. It took me a long time because not that I had so much trauma, but I was in a friendship, not a romantic relationship, but I was in a friendship with somebody who was a narcissistic pedophile. Right. I was best friends with this person for 8 years. Wow. And I was in an organization where it was like, if you go and do this, then you're going to burn in hell. Like, if you do that, like, there's so much that it was like, there was constantly made me question everything about myself and feel terrible about myself all the time. So I had to work through a lot of that stuff, a lot of energy healing, a lot of plant medicine, for me.
Right.
And I still do work now because it's like touch up. It's like you can't take your car to get detailed and never expect it to need cleaning again.
Right. Yeah. Or I always like the gym analogy too. You don't go and work out for like 1 month and then you're done for the rest of your life.
Right.
That's how it works.
It's not how it works. Gosh, right? And I almost want to say, wouldn't that be nice? But I like working out, so I can't even say.
I enjoy it too. I like the process of it. But, and I think that we can also make that analogy with the healing and the self-work. The process is part of the fun. Discovering, like, it's really fun to discover your intuition again, to start to be able to trust that stuff is exciting. So, there's maybe a perspective shift to be had in some of this healing as well, is that it can be a fun journey. It's not just revisiting all the shitty stuff that's ever been, done to you, or all the crappy ways you're sabotaging yourself. It's an exciting journey on, a happier path ahead.
Yeah. And, when we talk about the body code and using that, which is an energy medicine tool that identifies and releases trapped emotions and trauma. And when I am doing this with my clients, it's really cool because they may have statements. Like, I was just working on somebody and her statements, I'm guilty. She feels guilty about everything. Like, somebody else isn't happy, she's feeling guilty about it. Right. And I have her have them write what their energetic charge is of that statement. And it's like, oh, that's really high because I feel guilty about everything. Right. And we release the stuff that the body code brings up. And then when they're like, yeah, that's not even a thing anymore. Did I say that? Really? I said that before, right? That's the cool thing about it. Like, you don't have to repeat the story over and over and over again, right? It's because there's this stuff that is basically reinforce that belief. And we just need to get that stuff out to take away that reinforcement, and the belief just crumbles. Mm-hmm. And that's the great thing about the body code, is it's really easy. And it's not like you have to do that much. Like, you give the practitioner permission to work on you, and you just be open and willing, for the process to happen. and it happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to go a couple layers deep. Like we may start out here, we think that it's one thing, but there's a couple other things where we have to start out here and release the stuff before we can get to like the root issue. Right? But it's a way faster process than 10 years of therapy where you're telling the same story over and over again.
Right.
So yeah,
I think we've touched on that one before too. I do think that sometimes, not to knock talk therapy, it certainly helps a lot of people, but
right.
Really a lot of times what you're doing is just reliving it. You're reliving it, and reliving it, and reliving it. And that can desensitize you to it, I suppose. But I don't know that I believe that it heals it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about the body code or working with either of us, my website is heathere.com, and there's information there on there how you can work with me, schedule a call. You can reach out to Deb at Deborah, Debra.Caron, Caron @gmail.com. And if you're like, oh gosh, a lot of those things resonated with me, and I think I need some emotional healing, we would love to help you with this. And if you're like, oh, but I don't know, I don't even understand what they're talking about, we get it because we feel the same way. There are times even when I work on people and I'm like, hope this works. Right? But it does.
I know. So, it is interesting. I'm working on somebody's heart wall right now that has been super interesting just because it's so different than what I've seen so far. Which, yeah, it is. It's always like kind of like, okay, even I feel mystified by it and I understand it, so
yeah. Because there's no like healing isn't a straight line. Right. And, if we keep going down the routes that we've been going down, and a lot of times, as like my soapbox, like people will call this stuff alternative medicine. Right. And they're like, oh, it's new age stuff. And I'm like, all of the stuff that people are doing today, that's new age. Like that stuff wasn't around for hundreds of years. Right. All of this stuff. Yeah. Like, you go back centuries, and whether it's like through like looking at the native Indians and the healing stuff that they did or whatever, all this stuff has been around. They understood how the world worked and interacting with the worord. That's a whole other thing that we can jump off. So we'll wrap up there. If you all want to learn more, maybe we'll do a episode or two working on people. We'll see.
Yeah,
let's talk about it. But if y'all have any suggestions or thoughts of what you want to see us to do, talk about, let us know. We will talk to you later.